In this lesson, we are going to learn about fractions and equivalent fractions. So a fraction is written like this, maybe. And that represents 2/3. Or it could be 3/4. And what that means is 3 out of 4, or 2 out of 3. So let's say that I had a pizza cut into 4. And I ate this piece, and this piece. This would be the fraction to represent how much I ate. I ate 3 out of 4 pieces because the pizza was divided into 4. So we use fractions to show parts of something. When you have a fraction written like 3/4, there are 2 parts to it. The number on top is called the numerator. And the number on the bottom is called the denominator. And those are 2 things you should know. So the top number is always called the numerator, and the bottom number is called the denominator. And it's separated by like a slash or a line. Some people might write 3/4 like this with a straight line. Some people might write 3/4 like this with kind of an angled line. Those are both fractions that show 3/4 or 3/4. You could say it that way as well, 3/4. So if we look at the word equivalent fractions, the base word we see, it means equal. It stands for equal. So what we're talking about is equal fractions. And I'm going to explain what that means. So here I have a rectangle made of square tiles. And how many rectangles are there altogether? There are 12. So my fraction is out of 12. And if I was to ask you how many are green, what would you say? You might say 6 are green. I hope you would. You'd be right. So the fraction to show the number of squares that are green is 6/12. That shows how many are green. What about how many are red? Well, you'd be right if you said 6/12. 6/12 of the rectangle have red squares. Excellent. Now, if I was to ask you to group this into maybe 2 groups of 2, you might say that there's one group of 2, 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 and there's one group of 2. Excellent. So now how many groups of 2 do we have? Well, we have 6 groups of 2. And out of those 6, how many groups are green? 3 are green. So we could write a fraction that says 3/6 of this rectangle are green squares. 3 out of 6 groups. But remember, we also had, before we said 6 out of 12 were green. And that's the same thing. 6 out of 12 is equal or equivalent to 3/6, because we're talking about the same rectangle with the red and green squares. Let's try to find another equivalent fraction. Let's group these another way. I could group these squares into groups of 3. I could make a group of 3 here, and a group of 3 here, and a group of 3 here, and a group of 3 here. Now, how many groups of 3 do we have? We have 4 groups of 3 altogether. And how many are green? 2 groups. So we could say 2/4 of this rectangle is green. Excellent. It's the same rectangle as 6/12, and the same rectangle that we had when we found 3/6, 3 out of 6 groups, and the same when we found 2 out of 4 groups, or 2/4, being green. So these fractions up top are all equivalent. There's one more way we could group this. I could group this rectangular picture into 2 sections, those green ones and those red ones, as long as they're equal sections, and they are. So how many sections are there? Well, there are 2 sections altogether, and how many are green? 1. So 1 out of 2, or another way to say that is 1/2. 1/2 of the rectangle is green, and 1/2 is red. So 6/12, 3/6, 2/4, and 1/2 are all equivalent. We're using the same picture, but just grouping them differently. So how do we get equivalent fractions? Well, if you have a fraction like 1/2, what you could do is you could multiply the denominator and the numerator by the same number to get an equivalent fraction. So let's multiply them both by, I don't know, let's choose 4. So I'm going to multiply them both by 4. 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. So that means that 1/2 and 4/8 are equal, which we call equivalent fractions. They're equivalent because we multiplied both the numerator and denominator by the same number. We get an equivalent fraction. Let's do another example. If I have 3/8, let's make an equivalent fraction. Well, I'm going to multiply both my numerator and my denominator by 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 8 times 2 is 16. Because I multiplied both the numerator and the denominator by the exact same number, 3/8 is equal or equivalent to 6/16. We could even do another example. Let's multiply 6 by 2 and 16 by 2. 6 times 2 is 12. 16 times 2 is 32. You know what? Because we multiplied by the exact same number here and here, our numerator and denominator, we have an equivalent fraction. 12/32 is the exact same as 3/8 and also 6/16. You can also divide by the same number to get an equivalent fraction. If you had 6/10, well, they're both even numbers, so we could divide them each by 2, because even numbers can be divided by 2. And 6 divided by 2 is 3, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. And there's an equivalent fraction. 6/10 is the same or equivalent to 3/5. Excellent. So remember, as long as you multiply or divide your numerator and denominator by the exact same number, you'll get an equivalent fraction. Even if you use a bigger number. Let's say I had 3/5. Well, I'm going to multiply each one by 7. 3 times 7 is 21, and 5 times 7 is 35. So 3/5 is equal or equivalent to 21/35, because I multiplied by the exact same number, both my numerator and my denominator.